So Procter & Gamble has written down $8 billion off the value of their Gillette brand in their latest quarterly earnings report released last week. Now, predictably, this has led many to repeat the mantra, get woke, go broke, in reference to Gillette's feminist-inspired public service announcement masquerading as an ad campaign launched back in January. On top of this, now we have some bizarre comments from the CEO that the ad, whilst not helping Gillette's sales, was a price worth paying, and that he didn't mind alienating some customers. Now, I'll get to those comments in a moment because they're very revealing to the extent that corporations have adopted woke politics. But I want to talk more about the more mundane financial mechanics of the write-down first, because from what I've seen on social media, I don't think it's well understood. So whilst I admit to a certain amount of schadenfreude here myself, and it would be very satisfying to believe that the reason for the write-down was the ad campaign, it's not that simple. Firstly, headlines like these don't really help if you're not familiar with financial terminology. To say Gillette lost $8 billion isn't entirely accurate, at least as most people think of a loss, which is simply your expenses more than your revenues. For example, let's say you make widgets, you buy raw materials that go into the widgets, you have plant and equipment that manufacture the widgets, and you pay the salaries of people that run the machines to make the widgets, and you spend money on advertising and marketing your widgets. Let's say you spent $10 billion on the aforementioned expenses, but your revenues are only $2 billion. Maybe management overestimated the demand for the product. Perhaps a competitor came in and offered a cheaper, better quality alternative and slashed your market share. Whatever the reason, your expenses were $10 billion, your sales revenue $2 billion, so you have a loss of $8 billion. In Gillette's terms, they spent $10 billion on manufacturing and marketing Gillette products and only made $2 billion in sales. But that's not what happened at all. Remember, Gillette is owned by Procter & Gamble, which sells a huge range of products. When P&G report their results, Gillette is categorized under the grooming subsidiary. As you can see, the grooming business made $467 million after tax for the 3 months ending June 30th. So this is still a very profitable business, although we should note that net sales actually declined 3% versus a year ago, which is not a good sign. So the $8 billion loss does not mean that Gillette is losing money. No cash went out the door, and P&G does not now have $8 billion less cash in the bank. The $8 billion is a write-down of the carrying value of the Gillette asset on P&G's books. In the parlance of the P&G quarterly report, during the April-June 2019 quarter, the company took a non-cash after-tax charge of $8 billion to adjust the US dollar carrying values of Goodwill and trade name intangible assets in the Gillette shave care business. So the key words are goodwill and intangible assets. Generally speaking, when a company purchases another company, they acquire the assets and liabilities of the target company. Some of the assets may be intangible assets. Tangible assets are things like plant and equipment. Liabilities might include any debt the company being purchased has, along with what they owe their trade creditors. So let's say the book value or carrying value of the assets and liabilities of a company amounts to $5 billion. But the acquiring company pays $10 billion for the acquisition. The acquirer will record the assets and liabilities in their books at a net $5 billion, and the extra $5 billion will be recorded as goodwill. Why would they pay more than the carrying value of the assets and liabilities? Because they may think that the brand or brands they acquired are worth $5 billion, and because those brands have the capacity to generate profits in the future that make the price worthwhile. Intangibles may also include patents or other intellectual property. These are examples of intangible assets, and that is what P&G wrote down. P&G paid $54 billion for Gillette back in 2005. I don't know how much of that was goodwill, but I suspect most of it. Remember, Gillette had virtually cornered the market for razor blades. Even today, if I walk into a major supermarket and go to the men's grooming section, most of the products on the shelf are Gillette. Go and try this for yourself. According to Euromonitor, Gillette held a 53% share of men's razors and blades in the US in 2018. That's down from 71% in 2011, as this article from 2016 notes. In just the 5 years since Dollar Shave Club launched, P&G's North American market share in razors and blades has tumbled from 71% to 59% in a business where competitors wage nuclear war over single points of share. And as we now know, that 59% has fallen to 53% in the 3 years since that article was written. Years ago, accounting standards dictated that Goodwill had to be written off over a 10-year period. Today, it's subject to revaluation. Accountants reassess the value of the Goodwill and may adjust it up or down depending on whether they think it is worth more or less. So clearly the $8 billion write-down taken by P&G against Gillette's Goodwill reflects the declining value of the Gillette brand that has been underway for more than 8 years and was not caused by the recent ad campaign. Although, as we will see, it certainly didn't help. Now let's get to the comments of Gillette CEO Gary Coombe. The CEO of Gillette said he does not regret his company's controversial marketing campaign inspired by the hashtag #MeToo movement, despite losing some loyal customers over it. Gary Coombe called the loss of revenue from those customers a price worth paying in a Monday interview with Marketing Week. And I would use the Marketing Week article, but most of it is behind a paywall. Procter & Gamble, the parent company of Gillette, announced Tuesday they had taken over $5 billion in losses for the quarter, after Gillette had an $8 billion non-cash write-down after its market share for razors fell over the last 3 years. And as we've seen, Gillette's market share has been falling for a lot longer than that. Coombe said that the hashtag #MeToo ad the company put out in January was an attempt to capture market share among millennials, a category in which they were losing market share to Harry's and Dollar Shave Club. It was pretty stark. We were losing share. We were losing awareness and penetration, and something had to be done. Adding they decided to take a chance in an emotionally charged way. So the woke ad campaign was a Hail Mary pass trying to arrest the decline of the Gillette brand that had been going on for years. But I don't really understand this strategy. The reason millennials use less Gillette products is because less of them shave. Beards have been in fashion for the past few years, and they're part of the hipster uniform. Add a fedora and a sense of smug condescension and you can call yourself hip. Even though once enough people are doing it, as is the case today, it's actually an act of conformity. Coombe said that he'd been surprised by the intense backlash, but said the transgender ad, and that was the second ad, was less provocative than other versions they had created. Does that mean there were other versions that we didn't get to see? Wouldn't you love to see those versions? It's not difficult to imagine, I suppose. They probably had men beating the shit out of women, coupled with man-spreading and pay gaps and applying collective guilt to everyone with a dick. I don't enjoy that some people were offended by the film and upset at the brand as a consequence. That's not nice and goes against every ounce of training I've had in this industry over a third of a century. But I'm absolutely of the view now that for the majority of people to fall more deeply in love with today's brands, you have to risk upsetting a small minority, and that's what we've done. That strikes me as somewhat bizarre. Who cares if it was offensive, as it certainly was to some? I've never been able to wrap my mind around this idea that we're supposed to care if something is offensive or someone is offended. Stephen Fry wrote about this some years ago. It's now very common to hear people say, "I'm rather offended by that," as if that gives them certain rights. It's actually nothing more than a whine. I find that offensive. It has no meaning. It has no purpose. It has no reason to be respected as a phrase. I'm offended by that. Well, so fucking what? Your job, Mr. Coombe, is to sell razors, and if you do something provocative that offends some people and it helps to sell more razors, then who cares? You've done your job. If this campaign had been successful and led to a boost in sales, does anyone think this virtue-signalling wanker would be saying this? Of course he wouldn't. He'd be gloating about what a visionary move he made. Notice that Coombe says, risk upsetting a small minority. Really? A small minority? The original ad has been viewed over 31 million times and received 1.5 million downvotes, almost twice the number of upvotes. Only about 7% of people decided to give a thumbs up or down, which doesn't mean the other 93% thought it was okay. Most people just don't bother to click one way or the other. What percentage of Gillette users actually saw the ad? We don't know, and neither does Coombe's. Coombe's is trying to minimise the failure of the ad. The insinuation is that it's some small minority of bitter misogynists. Really? 1.5 million people, including no doubt some women, took the time to let you know they thought your ad sucked. The last sentence also strikes me as odd. Is it really true that for the majority of people to fall more deeply in love with today's brands, you have to risk upsetting a small minority? Why? I don't have any hard evidence, but I sense there is an increasing number of people that would like to depoliticize their brands and other purchases they make. If the Israel Folau saga taught us anything, it's that a not insignificant slice of the general public are sick of being lectured to by people and institutions that see themselves as our moral betters. We can't just watch the footy, we need a sermon on domestic violence or Indigenous recognition. I can't just buy a product because it works well and does the job I need it to at an affordable price. No, I have to fall in love with it because of the moral stance of the company that makes it. It used to be conservative Christians that annoyed the hell out of people with their sanctimonious moralistic pronouncements. Now it's large companies and institutions. Back in January when the first ad was released, Jim Treacher at PJ Media summed up the Gillette campaign this way. Gillette has learned that in current year it's not enough for a company to make a product that people want. It's not enough to make them feel inadequate about themselves and then sell them the supposed cure for that inadequacy. Consumers, men in particular, must be made to feel worthless. They have to be reminded that their needs and desires are wrong under any circumstances, that their instincts are loathsome, that their very existence is a malignancy, and that they're responsible for all the world's ills, whether they want to admit it or not. Now give them your money, you piece of garbage. And here's what he had to say more recently on August 1st. Advertising has been taken over by social justice warriors. If you enjoy being scolded by the people who are trying to sell you their products, feel free to spend your money as you see fit. The rest of us male chauvinist pigs will take our business elsewhere. Amen. I have taken my business elsewhere. I used Gillette razors for as long as I can remember, but for the last 6 months I've been using something else. And it wasn't because the other brand made some provocative statement to make me fall in love with it. It's because they didn't tell me I'm a piece of shit for having a pair of balls and debase the achievements and aspirations of men to appease a narcissistic need of some women to make themselves the centre of the universe. As usual, let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I'll see you next time.